If you need a view of what's happening on your system in real time, then you want to use the Windows Task Manager. This is a great place to go to view statistics like your CPU utilization, how much memory a particular process or an application might be using. You can see exactly how much disk access might be going on at any particular time. This can be really helpful for trying to find those applications that are slowing down your computer or that might be using a lot of CPU cycles. To start the Task Manager, you can press Control-Alt-Delete and then choose Task Manager. You can also start the Task Manager directly from the taskbar. If you right mouse click anywhere in an open space in the taskbar, you'll have one of those options available for the Task Manager. Or you can use my favorite hotkey to launch the Task Manager, which is Control, Shift, and Escape. Here's my Windows 7 desktop. I'm going to start a few tasks. Let's start the notepad. I'll also start a calculator. We'll get some things going in this operating system. And now I'd like to see just how much memory and other types of system resources might be used by these applications. So I'm going to start the Task Manager. And I could go down to the taskbar and right mouse click and choose Start Task Manager, or use my Control, Shift, and Escape, and Task Manager will launch. You have a number of different tabs across the top. If you're looking at what's happening from an application perspective, we'll start with this Application tab, and you can see I've got two apps running, which is the calculator and which is my notepad. And from here, we can end the task, we can switch to a particular task, or we can even launch new tasks right here. If you know the exact command line option to use to start a particular executable, this would be a great place to do it. Very similar to the Start Run option inside of Windows. Well, of course, what we see as applications on our desktop doesn't really show the whole picture. There are a lot of other things that are happening behind the scenes. And to see those, we can go to the next tab, which is called Processes. In the Processes tab, we can see all of the different applications that might be running as processes, and we can see that some of these are not listed as applications. We can certainly see the calc.exe and we can see the notepad.exe, but notice the Windows Explorer itself is an executable, and things like my VirtualBox guest tray that is down on my taskbar is also listed here. And there are a number of other processes running here as well. There are also system processes we don't see here. By default, we just see the processes for us, but if we check this at the bottom, click this button for Show Processes from All Users, we can see all of the system options as well. Look at all of these things that are running on our Windows system, and you can view it all from this view in Task Manager. You can also change what you can view. Notice you see the image name, the executable that's running, the user that launched this particular process. We can see CPU utilization, how much memory, and the description, but you can also change options for the columns. Maybe you'd like to see information about I/O, especially reading and writing traffic. Maybe you'd like to include those. Now you have even more statistics to view inside of Task Manager. And if you're trying to troubleshoot and find exactly where a slowdown might be occurring, you may need to load up some additional metrics to view. There's also a Services tab, which shows you just the services that are running on your computer. This might allow you to identify what the status of a particular service might be without having to go into the Services Manager inside of Windows. There's also a Performance tab, so we can see how much CPU, how much memory, and other memory statistics may be used on this computer at any particular time. Notice there's also a convenient button here to launch the External Resource Monitor. If you're trying to determine what type of utilization you're using across the network, there's a Networking tab, and there's also a Users tab. If there are multiple users connected to your computer, maybe they're connecting across the network, you would see them listed here. That way, if you wanted to disconnect someone from a particular application or remove them from your computer or simply shut down, you can get an update of exactly who might be on your computer at any particular time. There is a lot of detail inside of the Windows Task Manager, but you can see that if you're trying to troubleshoot a particular performance problem, you should be able to find all the information you need right inside of the Task Manager. Start your Windows operating system, you're commonly prompted for a username or a password, and that gives you access to have certain rights and permissions while you're using the operating system. These rights and permissions are assigned to you as a user. You're assigned a username, and you use that username during the login process. There are a couple of different kinds of users. One is the administrator. This is the one that really has all of the control when you're using Windows. There's also a guest user that is commonly disabled, but you can configure it to give people very limited access to the operating system. This can be a bit of a security concern, so the guest account is commonly disabled by default. And everyone else is the regular user. You're not an administrator, you're not the limited guest user, you're a user with certain rights and permissions that are associated with you while you're using the operating system. Another feature that allows you to set permissions for large groups of people at one time is built into the operating system, and it's called groups. Inside of these groups, we can assign users, and groups of users would then have access to a certain area of the hard drive. They might have access to a particular shared folder, or they may have the ability to perform certain operating system functions, like perform backups or reset passwords on the computer. You can see some of the built-in groups like administrators, users, backup operators, power users. There's many more that you can see inside of the operating system, and you can create groups for yourself so that you can administer who might have access to shared folders or other parts of the OS. One of the easiest places to administer your users and your groups is in your computer management. So in Windows Vista and Windows 7, you choose your control panel under Administrative Tools and choose Computer Management. Inside of Computer Management is a section for local users and groups. Notice that it says local users and groups. There are also users and groups that might be part of a Windows domain. A Windows domain is a much larger environment where you have centralized domain controllers, and you assign all of the rights and permissions for all of your users on that central facility. You don't go to everybody's individual machine and set up your rights and permissions that way. If you're a medium to large business, it's very common to have those Active Directory controllers set up to provide you with that Windows domain functionality. But if you're not going to use a Windows domain, or this is a standalone computer, you need to configure all rights and permissions on everyone's individual device, and that's why it says local users and groups. Any changes we make inside of this users and groups area will only be applicable to this local computer. This is a fresh installation of Windows 7, so let's see the users that are available. I'll click the users folder, and you can see there are 3 users in here currently. There is an administrator, a guest, and a user that was created during the installation process called Rodney McKay. If we look at the properties of a user, you can then administer the different capabilities for this user. You can set a full name for this user, a description of who this user is. You can change password settings. In this case, notice that Rodney's password never expires. And you can, of course, decide that, yes, his password should expire, and you can apply that. And now there will be a timeout, and he will periodically need to update his password. You can see what members of groups this particular user is, and you can see Rodney's only a member of the administrators group. If we wanted to add him to different groups, maybe we would not want him to be an administrator, we can always choose the add button and choose to set different configurations inside of here. You might even want to search for different groups that you might have on this computer, and we can find one, for instance, as backup operators. And if we choose that option, now Rodney becomes an administrator group and a backup operator group. And we can make changes to other groups as well, add multiples at the same time, and change whatever rights and permissions this user might need to have available to them. If we wanted to add a new user, it's a similar process. We simply right mouse click and choose new user, and we can fill in the blanks there. So you can add, remove, change configurations, and do whatever you need to do for the local users who might be accessing resources on this individual computer. Now let's look at the groups. If I close this and choose the groups section, you saw earlier there were a lot of built-in groups available. You can see all of them listed here, everything from administrators and backup operators, cryptographic operators, event log readers. All of these different groups give different rights and permissions. If you wanted to add a new group, you simply right mouse click and you can add a new group into this list and even add the members into this group in the same way that you had before. You can also go into the individual groups group, for instance, the administrators group, and look at the properties and see who might be in there as well. And then you can add or remove individuals from those groups. So this combination of groups and users gives you a way to really precisely define what type of rights and permissions someone might have when they're accessing resources on your individual computer. Whether you're using Windows XP, Windows Vista, or Windows 7, there are some control panel utilities that you should be aware of. And in this video, we're going to look at some of these utilities that are standard to each of those operating systems. Under the General tab, you'll find options that allow you to customize how your browsing experience might be. For instance, you can set your home page, what it happens to be when you start your browser for the first time, or you can determine how your tabs are displayed or what is displayed when your browser starts up. Under the Security tab, you'll find options that determine what your browser will be able to use depending on what location you happen to be in. If you are on a public network, maybe you don't want to download any ActiveX plugins, but maybe when you're at home you do, and you can configure that under the Security tab. The Privacy tab allows you to configure how personally identifiable information might be stored or information that can track you as you move from website to website. So you can configure cookie information in here, enable or disable your pop-up blocker, or configure how you're going to use the in private browsing, which is the anonymous browsing feature within Internet Explorer. There's also a content section that allows you to lock down the browser. If you wanted to configure some family safety options, this is where you would find those. You would also see information about SSL certificates inside of here, which is used for encrypting information that you're using to communicate to the websites out on the internet. If you're communicating to the internet through a virtual private network, you will find VPN information under the Connections tab. This is also where you will set proxy settings. So if you're in a very large organization that uses proxies as a go-between between you and the internet, this is where those settings are configured. The Programs tab allows you to configure what your defaults are when you're using the internet, especially inside of your browser. So when you click on an email address inside of your browser, what email client starts? You can configure all of those types of things under the Programs tab. And finally, the Advanced tab allows you to get into very detailed configurations of your internet browsing. For instance, if you wanted to enable or disable JavaScript, you could do that inside of the Advanced tab. All of these work together to be able to determine what your internet browsing experience is going to be like. Under Windows XP, Windows Vista, and Windows 7, you will find a display option inside of your control panel. And as the name implies, this is how you configure the view and the settings for the display that's connected to your computer. One of those settings is the resolution options. This becomes especially important for LCD monitors since those particular kinds of displays have a native resolution that is going to give you the best display. It will be the crisp display instead of something that is a little blurrier. So you want to be sure to set those resolutions for exactly the native resolution if you want something that is as crisp and clear as possible. Another option inside of the display is the text size. You can make the text on your screen larger or smaller without changing the default resolution of your system. That becomes very useful if you're having a hard time seeing some of the text on your screen. Simply modify how big the text is going to be. And if you're someone who does a lot of online publishing, working with graphics or photos, you may want to look into the option inside of the display for color calibration. That way you can configure your screen to look as accurate as possible. So when you're editing on your display and then you're finally printing on the final printout, you can have those match as closely as possible. Inside of your control panel is also an option for user accounts. These are the accounts that are used when you start up Windows and you log into your system. In Windows, of course, there are different kinds of accounts. You have local accounts that are stored on individual devices, and in very large organizations, you might have domain accounts that are centrally managed from Active Directory servers in those environments. When you go into the control panel under user accounts, we're dealing only with those local accounts on that machine. As you would expect, the configuration options inside of user accounts are things that will allow you to customize the experience for the user. For instance, you can configure an account name and the type of account. You can decide who happens to be an administrator and who doesn't. You can also modify a password. If somebody happens to forget their password or you would like to change it, you can do that from inside the user accounts utility. There's also a picture that is displayed for this account. It's displayed in many places, but you commonly see that when you first start up your computer and you're logging in. You'll see the picture of a person or something that is representative of that particular account, and you can change that setting right here inside of user accounts. There's also a setting in here for certificate information. Every single user has a different set of certificates, and these might be used, for instance, to encrypt information that someone is storing on this computer. Everybody gets a different certificate, so when one person encrypts information, they're encrypting it with something that is very specific to their account. Somebody else can't log in and access that information because that other person will be using a different certificate. It's very common to use Windows Explorer if you need to do any type of file management on your computer. And in your control panel under the folder options, you'll have the ability to customize what you see in Windows Explorer. One of those is how you would set the general options. For instance, what windows open up whenever you click. You can define how each folder opens, how a single click works, or how the navigation pane might work. You also have an option here for view. If you would like to have very granular control on what you view inside of the Windows Explorer, that's the area that allows you to not only configure that, but there's a nice button in there to reset every option you have in case you're not seeing something the way you would expect to see it inside of Windows Explorer. You also have folder options for searching. Windows will index a lot of folders, but you can define exactly what folders are indexed, and then you can also define how your searches will work in an area of your drive that is not indexed. All of those options will be available for you inside of that search tab inside of the folder options. When we're troubleshooting computers, we often want to know some basic information about the hardware. How much memory is inside of your system? What type of processor are you running? What version of Windows is this? If you need to find any of those details, you'll find that and a little more inside of the system option that is in your control panel. First, you'll get computer information, so you'll happen to find out exactly what's configured in this system. For instance, the operating system version. This system is Windows 7 Professional. It even tells you what service pack is installed on this computer. I can get something called system ratings, which take a conglomeration of statistics about how much processor speed you have, how much memory, the system configuration, the type of graphics you have, and it gives you a performance score that you can use to compare this to other computers. You also might want to see in here what computer name, what work group, or what domain this computer might be a part of. You can also see this in the system tab. And here at the bottom, you'll be able to tell if this is a genuine Windows system, because you'll be able to see if it has been activated and what the product ID might be. If you're worried about the security of your system, you want to be sure that your antivirus is up to date, that all of the security patches have been installed on your machine, you can visit the Security Center. That's what it's called in Windows XP and Windows Vista. If you're in Windows 7, this is called the Action Center. This is going to be able to give you an overview of exactly the security of your system, the antivirus and anti-spyware. You can see if your automatic updates are configured properly. And if you're trying to go to one place to get an overall perspective of how the system is configured from a security perspective, this is a great place to go. And it can give you some pointers about things that you may be able to do. For instance, if antivirus is not installed, you get a big red view that shows you that there's a problem. If there's something that you need to be aware of, but perhaps is not a glaring security problem, you'll see it colored yellow inside of the Security Center. So you'll get visual feedback if there's anything that you need to do to keep your system as secure as possible. One nice security feature of Windows is the built-in Windows Firewall. This is something that is running Windows XP, Windows Vista, Windows 7, and other Windows operating systems, and allows you to keep the bad guys from coming into your computer without your knowledge. This is integrated into the operating system, so it's always going to be there and available for you to use. You can find it in the control panel under Windows Firewall. If you're using a mobile device, you know it can be a challenge to have enough battery power to be able to perform the tasks you need. You want to be able to customize how bright your display is. Maybe you'd like your hard drive that is spinning and using power to power itself off whenever there's no access to the device. Or maybe you'd like the system to automatically turn itself off after a certain amount of time if nobody's using it. You can find those types of options inside of the control panel under Power Options. This is where you would configure power settings for your display, your storage devices, have your system hibernate automatically, and you can customize that whether you're running off battery power or whether you're plugged into a wall outlet. If you're trying to maximize the total amount of time you'll have available, Power Options is a great resource for you.